I'm very excited to be here, and thank you so much, Teresa, for inviting me. And I'm going to talk about how I went from being skeptical to spiritual, and how raising and losing my sister to cancer changed my life. And I took a little note from Karen. I was like, I'm just going to bring my notes up here. One other thing, I realized I look nothing like my picture. That was 8 years ago. And also during COVID, I chopped off my hair and decided to just give it up and let the white, gray, silver, whatever it's going to be come in. So this is kind of my year of ugly hair. We'll see what color it's going to be naturally at the end of this year. Decided just to embrace my age. So I bet you didn't know this, but my sister and I created the first selfie ever. This photo was taken the summer of 1995 with my 35mm camera, holding it way out here. And at that point, Adrienne had been living with me for 8 months. And here's a little overview of what I'm going to talk about. The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Hero's Journey, that concept. We'll dive into it. The Call to Adventure, the Fight, the Return. So in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell describes how stories take us on a journey, and he called it the hero's journey. And while not every stories follow this pattern or every aspect, most do, especially when you think about your action-adventure stories, when you think about films like Star Wars. George Lucas said he based Star Wars on the hero's journey. Even Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and again, almost every action hero movie has this hero's journey. And there are 3 main parts: the departure, the fight, and the return. And when you depart on your journey, that's your first step. It's your call to adventure. You're being asked to do something outside of your normal life. And at some point, you're going to leave that ordinary world behind, go into a different world, and you're going to encounter new people and problems and tests and challenges. And that's where the fight comes in. And many of you have already experienced this. You face an epic ordeal. It is literally the challenge of a lifetime. And after the fight, it's time to return home. But it's not easy going back to your previous life. And what I love about this particular graphic of the hero's journey is it shows that after the return, you can ascend to a higher plane of knowledge. And I want you to keep this in mind when I talk about my hero's journey. My sister, Adrienne, and I have the same mother, but different fathers. Her father died before she was born, and there's a 14-year age gap between us. In the December of 1994, she visited me for what was supposed to be a 2-week Christmas vacation in Los Angeles, which is where I lived all of my adult life until I moved back to the South, where I'm from, 9 years ago. Now, at that time, I was living with an abusive, alcoholic boyfriend. I had graduated early from the University of Southern California. I had a great apartment, a little bit of money, but I was really trying to figure out my life. I was a hot mess. And the day after Christmas, our mother called and said she didn't want to be a mother anymore. Now, I didn't put it together at the time, but it was 3 days before her 50th birthday, and I think it was a bit of a midlife crisis. And this was my call to adventure, because that 2-week vacation turned into a permanent stay. I was 22, and Adrienne was 8. I raised Adrienne all through my 20s, and after getting physical custody of her that Christmas, I eventually took our mother to court and sued and for legal custody and won. I was her Sherpa. In the spring of 2001, Adrienne was finishing her first year of high school in Southern California, and after a very serious battle of depression, she was doing well. She was an honor student with a 4.0 GPA. She was a budding musician, a talented artist, a writer, and she even took dance classes for fun. She had many friends and a wonderful boyfriend, and she had her whole life ahead of her. I wish I had actually included a picture of her from that time. But then on May 16th, 2001, 1 month after her 15th birthday, I came home from work, I was a teacher, and found her on the living room floor curled up in a fetal position and crying. And this was a kid who never cried. And she kept holding her right side, clutching it and saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." 6 hours later, it was an ER doctor who told us that she had tumors in her liver and lungs. And with those words, we were in the fight to save Adrienne's life. We were in part 2 of that hero journey. 2 days later, Adrienne was diagnosed with stage 4 hepatocellular carcinoma. Also, as you well know, primary liver cancer. And less than a week later, she was doing her first round of what I consider now useless chemotherapy at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And I want to talk about a few things I initially didn't have here, so I wrote them down. Karen and others mentioned that this can be a very silent disease. The doctors were so stunned by what they saw in her biopsy that they immediately came out while she was still in recovery and not awake, and they said, "We're going to test her for hepatitis." And I was like, okay. I mean, I was an educated 28-year-old at that point, but all I knew was hepatitis A because there had been an outbreak in one of her schools one year, and so I didn't know what they were talking about. And her CBC was normal. One of her liver enzymes was slightly elevated. In fact, the other one never went out of normal range. Her bilirubin wasn't elevated, nor did she have jaundice until the last week of her life, and she never had ascites. The doctors came back and they said, "Your sister has chronic hepatitis B and hepatitis C," which they determined based on when my sister was born in 1986, based on our mother's history of drug use that she got from our mother during childbirth. Our mother also regularly, after I left home, gave Adrienne shots that she called vitamins to put her to sleep. So it could be any combination of those things. So her only symptoms during this time was she was having some acid reflux, and she was chewing Tums like they were Tic Tacs. And as a parent, you can control what your child eats at home, but you sure can't do anything about what they eat outside of your home. So I just said, "Stop eating tacos at school, just stop." Exactly 2 weeks before we went to the ER, she had right shoulder pain. And we went to see her pediatrician, and he misdiagnosed it, understandably, as she had pulled her shoulder. She was in dance class every single day. She was very, very active, and that's what he thought it was. And so when we showed up exactly 2 weeks later to his office, he thought we were back about the shoulder. And my sister said, "No, I have this pain." And he was the one who sent us to the emergency room. And the only other symptom she had that's not directly related to HCC, but definitely was a huge sign that something was wrong with her body, was she had stopped getting her period. Sorry if the men are uncomfortable, but I'm going there. So I thought that she might be pregnant. I had that conversation with her. I mean, her boyfriend, they were very serious, and she was like, "Absolutely not. We have not had sex yet." But in the back of my mind, I was kind of worried about it because the women in our family have very normal, regular periods, almost like by the hour. You can time it. And so I kept thinking, well, her annual physical is in late May. We'll ask the doctor about it, and we'll ask him about this acid reflux. So those were her only symptoms. And I knew as much about liver cancer as the average adult in 2001. The only thing I knew was drinking was related to liver cancer. It wasn't until I found out that she had hepatitis B and C and looked it up in the medical dictionary that I still have today that I realized what the connection was. And her friends' parents, who were about 10 years older than me, so in their late 30s, more than one of them said, and we ended up just laughing about it, they said, "Oh my God, I didn't know she was such a drinker. She's a straight A student." So they literally thought a 15-year-old had drunk enough in her life to get metastatic liver cancer. So the lack of information was unbelievable. And her liver, someone mentioned this earlier, it can happen with hepatitis B and C. Her liver was non-cirrhotic. And there's a great quote that was in her medical records. And the doctor said she was, other than this liver cancer thing, she was a healthy, delightful 15-year-old. She never had hepatic encephalopathy, which I can never pronounce. In fact, her liver wasn't giving her the problems. It was the tumors in her lungs, ultimately, that gave her the most difficulty. And Karen mentioned something earlier about your body, and my sister didn't like her body. Most of her friends were just smaller than her, and she was almost 5'6" and very curvy. So after her first round of chemotherapy, she was thrilled that she lost 5 pounds, like thrilled. But then after 5.5 rounds of chemotherapy, she lost 33 pounds. It was 23% of her body weight. And she said, and I'm going to curse here, she's like, "Sissy, I have no ass meat." Like, she was just so skeletal, and she realized maybe being skinny is not as great as I thought it was. She spent her whole summer fighting liver cancer. But the treatment didn't work. Her journey lasted 147 days. She died on October 9th, 2001, in her own bed, surrounded by people who loved her. She was not hooked up to any machines other than oxygen, and her last words were, "I love you, Sissy." And she is buried at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. As I mentioned before, I used to live there. But now the fight was over, and I had no idea what I was going to do. I'm going to try to get through this next part without tearing up too much. I loved Adrienne more than I've loved anyone in my entire life. And there's this great quote, nobody knows who said it. "Children leave you, so do husbands and lovers. But your sisters, they are the only ones with you from crib till death." And that is so true. I was the first person to hold Adrienne when she was born, not our mother. And I was holding her in my arms when she died. And I didn't know how to return to a life without her. I didn't know how to live a life without her. I didn't see the point. 1 year after Adrienne's death, and for perspective, I was 30 years old, I was drowning in grief. And even though I hid it pretty well from most people, I was extremely suicidal. I had a 2-pronged suicide, totally infallible plan. I was despondent, hopeless, and I knew if I didn't find a way to channel my grief, I would die. So I decided to volunteer for a charity. And I won't name them, but Teresa knows who they are because she used to work for them. So I called the largest liver disease organization in the U.S. at that time. This was fall of 2002. And they didn't mention liver cancer on their website, which I thought was odd because I could see the trajectory. Like, I knew this cancer was not going away anytime soon. So I explained to the president of the LA chapter about my background, its writing, its marketing. I offered to volunteer and create a liver cancer program for them. They said no. They wanted nothing to do with liver cancer, even though they were really focused on liver disease. And after doing more research, I realized there wasn't a single organization in the U.S. doing anything about the type of liver cancer, hepatocellular carcinoma, that killed my sister. So to quote Lily Tomlin, I thought somebody should do something about that. And then I realized I am somebody. And when I was a little girl, it was never my dream to start a charity. And if that liver disease organization had accepted my offer to volunteer for them, my life might have taken a very different direction. But they didn't. And so I encourage you that there are often opportunities in the obstacles. Just keep an eye out for them. So in 2002, I founded Blue Faery, the Adrienne Wilson Liver Cancer Association. And Blue Faery's mission is to prevent, treat, and cure primary liver cancer, specifically hepatocellular carcinoma, through research, education, and advocacy. And the question that we get asked the most often is, why Blue Faery? Well, when I was coming up with a name for the organization, I wanted Adrienne's name in it, in her memory, and I wanted liver cancer in it, so people knew what the heck we did, but I felt like something was missing from a marketing perspective. And at that time, I had a very close-knit group of friends who were all sort of aunts and uncles to my sister. They didn't have children of their own yet, and they were there for most of her cancer journey. As people do, some fell away. So I emailed them, and I said, you know, I told them I want to start this organization. Something's missing. I can't figure out what it is. Every single person came back with some version of Blue Faery. Blue was my sister's favorite color, so much so when I finally allowed her to dye her hair at age 14, she dyed it blue, then red, then purple, and then back to blue. And so that photo on the left, I'm gonna try the pointer now. Ooh, there it is. So that was right after she had dyed her hair for her freshman year of high school, and she had dyed it blue again. And when she began losing her hair, although oddly, she was never completely bald, but she decided to get this blue wig to maintain her look. And that summer, she bought these blue butterfly wings, and we all started calling her our Blue Faery. And so the answer was right there. It's Blue Faery. And she is our Blue Faery, and we spell it with an E and not an I because that was the way she preferred to spell it. And we are a national nonprofit organization. But I do want to mention something about HCC, since we are in the South. The highest incidence of HCC is in states with very diverse populations. So exactly what you would expect: Illinois, New York, Florida, Texas, California. The only sort of exception there is Louisiana is in the top 10 for incidence. But the highest death rates from HCC are all in the South. The only overlap is Louisiana. And it comes back to what other people have said. It's the lack of resources, it's the lack of education, and the lack of information. So if anything, I do feel very blessed that when Adrienne was diagnosed, we were living in Los Angeles, and although she started her journey at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, it became quickly clear to me, as her Sherpa, that they didn't know what the heck they were doing, because HCC is not a pediatric disease, and she didn't have fibrolamellar, which affects young adults and teenagers, and so we transferred her to care to UCLA, where they saw HCC every single day. Now, from our very beginning, we focused on patient education. Initially, we did everything in-house, and 5 years ago, we partnered with Patient Resource because they have this vast distribution network. And so we published the first edition of our Patient Resource Guides with them in 2020. 40,000 English copies were distributed in over 700 treatment centers across all 50 states. And these are doctors' offices, hospitals, oncology offices requesting the guides. They're not just sent out randomly. So these are actual requests. We did the second edition, and we decided to add Spanish, and those were distributed over 500 treatment centers in 48 states. The third edition, which I have over here, free copies of, is in distribution now. And you can see we added Chinese as well. And in fact, our actual website translates into 12 other languages targeted at the HCC patient population. So while the majority of our web traffic does come from the US, the UK, and Canada, number 4 is India, and number 5 is China, because that's where HCC is. As someone who couldn't find another patient, much less a caregiver, who experienced HCC, creating a community was really essential to serving patients and families. However, and I know some people disagree with me on this, we opted not to start a Facebook group, because even if a group is private, your health information is not. on Facebook. It is not safe. So we waited until a better solution came along, and it did in about 2018, 2019. So we partnered with Health Unlocked. It's a private, HIPAA-compliant community for HCC patients and families, and it's available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, but it is very user-friendly in the way Facebook is. But again, it's private, and it's HIPAA-compliant. And for people who self-identify, they don't have to, but if they choose to, the ratio of patients to caregivers is about 1-to-1. And many caregivers stay on the platform after their loved one has died and often become volunteers for Blue Faery. We have many, many other programs. In 2009, we started the Blue Faery Award for Excellence in Liver Cancer Research. So it's an annual award we give out to acknowledge someone who is doing really innovative HCC-specific research. And we announce the award every year on my sister's birthday, which is Monday, April 8th. So this makes this extra special, Teresa. And if Adrienne were alive today, she would be 38 on her birthday. Yeah, so I can't tell you the recipient of this year's award. I can say he is the third international recipient, and he's a who's who in HCC, as all of the former award winners have been. We also have our Love Your Liver program, and this was a program that really came out of a need brought to us by our corporate council members and our medical advisory board, because for a long time we didn't do much in prevention because so many other groups were tackling that. You know, the Hepatitis B Foundation, many hepatitis C organizations, but they said, guys, you're Blue Faery and prevent is part of your mission statement. So we launched our Love Your Liver program in 2020, and it's really about liver disease, education, and awareness, so you can prevent that liver cancer. And now we have 3 campaigns throughout the year. We do focus on the people at highest risk for liver cancer across the U.S. So in February, we have our campaign. We tie it in with Black History Month, where we focus on African Americans in different cities. In May, tying in with Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. The second year in a row, we're focusing on Chinese Americans. Next year, we hope to do more in the Vietnamese population. And then in September/October, we tie in with Hispanic Heritage Month, and we focus on Hispanic Americans at risk. And it's really important because those different groups have different risk factors. We also have the Truth About Liver Cancer program. We have bi-monthly live workshops about various topics. And I've already slipped a flyer to Karen, so I have flyers over there. If you would like to participate, whether you've had liver cancer or liver disease, we really would love to have you. We're constantly developing new topics. So for example, last year we did Caregivers Corner, we did Survivor Stories, we did a 2-part series on your multidisciplinary team, and then we did a really special one in October about tough choices, where we had a palliative care specialist, a medical oncologist from the City of Hope, who may be one of the only oncologists I've ever met who talks about palliative care from day one with his patients. We had a GI oncology nurse, and then we had a caregiver whose father only lived 60 days with HCC, and they never knew he was at risk. And this right here, this is Sharon and Jimmy. Sharon is now a moderator in our liver cancer community, and her husband Jimmy was diagnosed with HCC. She found our community right away, and I'm so, so grateful. And they made the very tough and unusual decision to stop treatment, because unfortunately they had a terrible community oncologist. No offense if any are here, but they live in a very rural part of Texas, and their community oncologist came to town 1 day a week, and he had no experience with HCC, none whatsoever. But they were very fortunate that about an hour away they found a great GI doctor, and he was the one who said, you know, the treatment's killing him, and it's okay to stop treatment. Well, he did. He stopped treatment. He just took medication for pain management, And he had to renew hospice 2 times because he lived so well. And so the last year and 2 months of his life was amazing. And 2 days before he died, he was chopping wood in his yard and just had an incredible life. Now I'm going to go back to the hero's journey. In my 30s, I was in that return phase. And founding Blue Faery was not the only thing I did during that time. On the road back, I got the best dog ever. My 200-pound English Mastiff named Winston. He lived for 10 and a half years, and he really, really helped me heal, and he was my absolute best friend. I mean, let's be honest, animals are often better than people. They are. I also completed 6 marathons and 1 half marathon in Los Angeles, Vancouver, and Las Vegas to raise money for Blue Faery. And I will say I am not a runner at all. I hate cardio, can't stand it. I was like more of a speed walker, but I finished. I traveled to many new places, and one of my very first trips was to San Francisco. And this was in the summer of 2003. A high school friend of mine, I went to a very small performing arts high school, so we all still know each other. And he said, you know, I don't think you're doing so well. I want you to just come up here for 5 days, have a blast. And this was back in the days when Southwest Airlines round trip was less than $60 from Burbank. Yeah, right? Those were the days. And so I went up there not knowing what to expect. And I love this photo of me because that is the first genuine smile I had on my face after my sister died, and it took almost 2 years. And we were on a boat going under the Golden Gate Bridge, a very small boat, and I get seasick, but for some reason I wasn't seasick, and I was just splashed with water, and I felt happy. Like, for the first time, I felt really happy, and that told me that there was other moments of happiness going forward. I married the wrong man, but I had one heck of a wedding. Oh my God, it was great. But we are now divorced. I went back to school. I gave USC even more of my money. I got my master's degree in writing with an emphasis in nonfiction. And in fact, the thesis of my master's degree was the first draft of my book, Better Off Bald. So somewhere in the deep ethos of Google is a very bad first draft of my book. Speaking of books, so after finishing the first draft in 2008 when I graduated, and after many, many revisions and too many edits to count, my medical memoir, Better Off Bald, A Life in 147 Days, was published in 2019. And I'm very proud of my book, and I'm so thrilled it's been embraced and endorsed by the medical community. It's won many awards, but the biggest milestone for me was when it was put into the Mayo Patient Library. That was huge. And I feel like my book helped me to return and ascend to a higher plane with that new knowledge. One of my core values is service. It really is. And my purpose is to help people, especially cancer patients and caregivers. And while Better Off Bald is primarily my story, I'd Rather Be Dead Than Deaf is my sister's story told in her own words. And there's a giveaway for each one of these books. This was just launched this year on March 19th. Adrienne was a prolific writer who began journaling when she was quite young, and the book starts 1 year before her diagnosis. And so it's her journal, her artwork, and her poetry, and it continues up until just weeks before she died. The title of this talk is From Skeptical to Spiritual, so I want to circle back to that. When I was raising Adrienne, I considered myself agnostic. I only prayed 2 times when Adrienne was sick. I would have prayed more, but I didn't know who to pray to. And I didn't know if anyone was listening. And I didn't believe in God, but I did not believe in God either. Until I witnessed many, many miracles. But that is a whole different talk. But I know, without a doubt, my sister's with me. She watches over me. And when I really listen, she guides me. Although I can hear her right now going, well, you don't always listen to me. But I pray every night, and I talk to Adrienne every day. And so I have prayed for more than 8,000 consecutive days since she died. So I hope by sharing my hero's journey that you feel inspired and energized and motivated to move forward. And you saw me tear up. It's okay to cry. Karen talked about crying. You've got to let those emotions out. Don't stifle them. And I can't tell you it's going to be easy. It won't. It's not easy. It's not always fun. Every friend I had when I was raising my sister, that close-knit group of friends, all those people that came up with Blue Faery, one by one, I lost all of those friends, all of them. But I promise you will come out on the other side. And if you choose to do so, as so many of you already have, you can ascend to a higher plane and use your new knowledge and wisdom to help others. Thank you so, so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.